Happy 2017, folks. This is Abel James, and thanks so much for joining us on Fat Burning Man, where we help you look, feel, and be your absolute best. Today, we're here with returning guest, our friend Tim Ferriss, to deconstruct the most transformative habits you can learn from the top performers in the world. We'll share wisdom from Arnold, the Governator Schwarzenegger, our mutual mentor, Derek Sivers, Richard Branson, and other modern-day Renaissance men and women. Coming up on the show, you'll hear how to make healthy habits stick this new year, the curious reason Tim wore the same jeans and t-shirt for a week straight, gross Tim, who to trust in a world of phonies and blowhards, and even how to save your marriage. Before we get to the interview, here's a bit of breaking news that's a little hard to believe, if I'm going to be honest with you. Google just sent me an email revealing their 16th annual Year in Search, where they analyzed the most popular searches around the globe. And based on trillions of searches, the wild diet was named a top Google trend for all of 2016. So holy cannoli, and thank you Google, thank you Internet, but most importantly, thanks to you, dear listener. On top of that, this podcast, Fat Burning Man, has now ranked #1 in health for 5 years in a row in more than 8 countries around the world with tens of millions of downloads. And that's freaking crazy. So I just want to reiterate, I'm very thankful this time of year, and we couldn't do any of this without you. So I'm sincerely thankful that you believe in what we do. Now, if you're just listening to Fat Burning Man for the first time, #1, welcome to the party. #2, quick factoid. Fat Burning Man doesn't mean this show is just for men or all about fat burning or anything like that. In this case, man is meant to mean mankind. In fact, I make a point to keep this show family friendly and free to everyone, no locker room talk or F-bombs or anything like that. You might also notice that on this show, you won't hear a bunch of sponsors advertising over and over again. We decided to do things differently. When I listen to podcasts myself, personally, and I listen to a lot of them, and they're getting great these days, but I'm totally turned off by the ads, and it just seems like whenever you go on the internet, whenever you turn on a device, and even when you don't, sometimes they're bleeping at you, and it drives me crazy. As someone who's creating podcasts, I totally understand that when you have too much advertising, it wastes time and it ruins the vibe. So my wife, Allison, and I decided to bring this free show to you without outside sponsors this year. And that means we're getting a little bit creative because the bigger the show gets, and like I said, it gets tens of millions of downloads. So it costs money to produce the show, but we're getting creative and we enjoy a good challenge. So stay tuned for big news along those lines. But first, here's a review that just came in on iTunes. This one is from Alden. And he says, read your book and started listening to the show back in September. Today, I'm down 47 pounds with another 22 to get back to my high school weight. I feel great and look forward to each show. Alden, 47 pounds in less than 4 months is freaking incredible. So keep us updated, my man. Here's another one that just came in from Joe. He says, I've been transitioning to the wild diet over the last few months and taking a holistic approach to my lifestyle. I am no longer on any prescription medications. I was often sick, and I'm glad to say that those days are behind me. I'm hiking, rock climbing, and even backpacking again. My knees used to be so bad that I could hardly even jog without terrible pain, and now I'm running 2 to 3 times a week as a meditation session. I appreciate what you and Allison are doing for the health community. Well, Joe, thank you so much for sharing your story, and if you've been a listener for a while that I enjoy those fun runs with the dog, that kind of moving meditation. But you brought up something else, which is, this is kind of the secret. Once you get a handle of your nutrition, you start eating good, real foods, you get your energy back, and it makes things like hiking, climbing, and running fun again. You need to do something with all that energy. So I went through a similar experience when I was overweight and sick in my early 20s, as listeners well know. So totally agree with that. In light of the new year, let's reflect on another inspiring story. The story of a man who was bedridden for 13 months with $1.2 million in medical bills, who went on to drop 87 pounds and go rock climbing himself. In case you missed it last January, ABC was crazy enough to cast me with a starring role as an expert coach on a fitness and body transformation competition with perhaps the silliest title of all time, My Diet is Better Than Yours, starring Sean T., yours truly, Abel James, J-Lo and 50 Cent's trainer, Jay Cardiello, Don Blattner, and other people well worth watching. I like to say that the show is just bad enough to be timeless, and its unique premise puts coaches like me on the chopping block week after week. Now, if you want a little bit of motivation to get fit this year, you can watch full episodes of our ABC show on Hulu and even YouTube these days. Just search for My Diet is Better Than Yours and Abel James. You can also find some of the best clips of the show, including me running sprints dressed in a full-body bacon costume. I'm not joking. At fatburningman.com. Just type in fatburningman.com from any device. Have a good laugh, and don't forget to sign up for my newsletter for more free goodies. Here's the quick recap. In week 1, my contestant, Kurt Morgan from Atlanta, Georgia, transformed into a fat-burning beast with my plan, the Wild Diet. Enjoying grass-fed cheeseburgers, fatty coffee, and even a bit of chocolate, we finished week 1 in first place, winning number 1 in both the weigh-in and the fitness competitions. After just 6 weeks of being on the Wild Diet, Kurt shed a whopping 50 pounds, no longer needed any of his prescription medications, and dropped nearly double the body fat of the other 4 contestants who were on other plans like the vegan diet or just low-calorie diets, low-fat diets, things like that. So we had a little bit of different mojo going on, and that became obvious as the show went on. Kurt's wife, Alicia, even lost more than 30 pounds in 6 weeks by going wild. And then People magazine featured us in a full-page spread, and I even made cameos on Entertainment Tonight and Unnecessary Censorship on Jimmy Kimmel Live, which is totally surreal. When Kurt dropped a total of 87 pounds in 3.5 months on that show, we were overwhelmed with positive support and feedback from you guys. So once again, I just want to say, and I talk to Kurt all the time, we send each other silly cat memes, that we're both so grateful for you and your support along the way. And it's a lifelong journey, so thanks for being on it with us. Now, let's help you make the best of this New Year's momentum we got going on. If you feel stuck with stubborn body fat or ill health, you owe it to yourself to watch Kurt transform before your eyes. Kurt showed America that you really can be happy and healthy at the same time, and you can do it too. If you're ready to shed that fat and take your health into your own hands today, listen up. We're running a 30-day wild challenge, and you can join us right now. You'll get instant access to our best workouts, meal plans, quick start guides, audio and video, and more with our 30-day wild fat loss system featured on ABC TV. You'll get the entire system with 2 30-day meal plans. That's an extra 30 days of done-for-you meals. These are the exact meals and recipes I gave to Kurt and Alicia when I coached him on ABC television, including the chocolate pudding, which became world famous, and of course, the cheesecake. You can get it all with 6 bonuses for a limited time using this special link. From any device, type in fatburningman.com/30 days. That's the number 30, DAYS. So fatburningman.com/30 days. Or if you just want to dip your toes in with a free quick start guide, sign up for the free newsletter at fatburningman.com. And be sure to tune in next week for a groundbreaking episode with the always terrific Dr. David Perlmutter. Now on to the show with a man who seeks to be healthy, wealthy, and wise, the Tim Ferriss. You're about to learn the surprising benefit of listening to a single track of music over and over again, really, and I do this one too. The power of cultivating empty space, or how I became a multiple award-winning songwriter. That's another story for a later show. How to be the 1 person in 100 who actually keeps your New Year's resolutions, and much more. Let's go hang out with Tim. All right, folks, returning to the show this week is the human guinea pig fellow podcaster and New York Times bestselling author, Mr. Tim Ferriss. His latest book is Tools of Titans, the tactics, routines, and habits of billionaires, icons, and world-class performers. And man, it's a doozy. Thanks so much for coming back on the show, Tim.
Oh, my pleasure. Thanks for having me.
I'm stoked. So many people might assume that top performers are perfect, but that's not exactly how it works, right? So I'll start with this from your new book, and I quote, "Wow, Tim Ferriss is a mess." So what's going on, Tim?
Yeah, the goal of the book, I suppose, was multifold. There were several goals. One of them was to encourage people and reassure people by showing that across disciplines, whether you're looking at retired generals, special operations commanders, the CEOs of companies that you all know by name, billionaires, whoever it might be, household name, actresses and actors, etc., that they all are flawed creatures, just like you and me. They all have their weaknesses and insecurities. They all make mistakes. and that they've learned to develop habits and routines and so on around one or two strengths. That's it. That is enough to put you into the top 1% of whatever you want to do. So wow, Tim Ferriss's mess. I can't imagine how he gets anything done. That's from the introduction, where I talk about 2 chapters in particular that I put into the book just to show what my bad days look like, and they are bad. They are really bad. And describe the coping mechanisms that I use when I'm battling my own demons or in a dark phase, or just cannot seem to get anything right, where I'm just screwing one thing up after another, and I have a sort of littered mess of disaster behind me and seemingly ahead of me. What do I do? And these are situations we all face. So that is, I suppose, the genesis of the wow, Tim Ferriss is messed up component of all that.
Right. Well, that's the interesting thing that happens when you start to, I guess, bump into people at the top of their game, no matter what the domain it is, no matter what vertical it is. You find that these are all 100% real people, some more than others, right?
Yeah. Oh, for sure.
In a lot of cases, you find that there are a lot of chinks in the armor, but they don't worry about that because they're so busy usually doubling down on that extreme gift that they have, that they've built over the years, that really brings the most value to everyone around them.
Yeah. It's a practice of learning to try to leverage and multiply your strengths as opposed to fix all of your many, many tiny weaknesses, which is not a high return activity. Now, there are what we might consider fatal weaknesses or mission critical competencies that you need to have in any given field, but those are all coachable, learnable skills. And so in Tools of Titans, whether it is looking at military, venture capital, software development, competitive chess, memory champions, you do find commonalities. And what I've observed is that after doing 200 plus of these now, and I should also just mention that the book is probably 60% or so lessons from and my favorite tactics and so on that I have tested from these 200 guests across all domains. But 40% is all new advice from past guests, new guests, people like Jack Dorsey, Twitter and Square, and original chapters from me. So it's at least, the book is a big one. As you said, it's a doozy. It's 704 pages. It's not intended to be read A to Z, folks. It's like a choose your own adventure book, a buffet. So if you read 150 pages, I'll be thrilled. But the point being that I guess around, let's do some math, Tim Ferriss, see how I do.
Right,
whatever it is, maybe 300 pages is all brand new, never before seen stuff. And the point I was going to make, though, about the top 1% is that you'll find in any given field, in my experience, the people who are the best, like really the best at what they do, top 1%, have more in common with people in totally different fields who are in the top 1% than they do with the B players and the C players in their own field.
Right.
You find a lot of common patterns,
What sticks out to you?
Well, some of them are weird. I mean, the most consistent pattern is of daily mindfulness or meditative practice. That's more than 80% of the people I interviewed. And that can take many forms, though. So it's not just meditation, sit down and om. It's not just that, because that drives a lot of people away. It drove me away for a long time. It could be listening to a single music track on repeat for focus and using that as an external mantra. A lot of athletes do that. A lot of writers and coders do that. And so whether you are listening to the Last of Mohican soundtrack, as Alex Honnold, famed rock climber, does, or listening to a single track as you are creating WordPress, which now powers more than 25% of the internet, right. I consider that a tool of mindfulness because it's honing focus and making you aware of your thoughts. That could also be, for instance, Maria Popova, who's incredible and runs this site called Brain Pickings, highly, highly intelligent site. One woman labor of love. It's just a miracle at what she is able to pull off. And she listens to the same guided meditation. It's audio. It's free. You can find it online, from Tara Brach, Brach, who I later interviewed. And it's the 2010 Smile meditation. And if you look for that, you'll find it. There's an MP3 you can play. It's 25 minutes. And Maria Popova credits Tara Brach with changing her life. And Maria is a hard-charging, ultra producer of high-quality writing. I mean, it is just mind-boggling. And she listens to this every morning. So if I hear that once or twice, then I'm going to follow the gingerbread trail and test it for myself. And there's some – I was just going to say there's some really weird stuff too. Like you mentioned when we were chatting before we started recording, Kelly Starrett and CrossFit superhero. And a great guy. And so he, along with Rick Rubin, legendary music producer, and a few other people, introduced me to the Chili Pad. And the Chili Pad came out of left field. I'd never heard of it before, and I consider myself pretty hip and on the cutting edge with a lot of this. But it is a device that allows you to put a thin sheet under your normal bed sheets on your side, and then there's a bedside contraption that circulates water through at an exact temperature that you set between 55 degrees and I want to say 80 or 85 degrees. And that has been just a complete game changer. I mean, I have one. Kelly actually sent me one, I think he did. And I never would have spotted that as a pattern had I not done these 2 to 3 hour interviews. So a lot of weird stuff, a lot of unusual stuff, but all very useful. And my vetting process was looking at 10,000 plus pages of transcripts, right? Vetting it down to the things that I had tested and used that had produced unusually good returns in my life, like small input in, large output out. But it's been a wacky journey, man. I mean, I never thought I was going to podcast longer than 6 episodes, but here we are.
Here we are. And it's crushing it, man. You just passed 100 million downloads, right?
I did. Yeah. I just passed 100 million, and it's wild. It's wild.
It's totally wild. Let me go back to what you said before, because the Chili Pad, I believe that's going to save thousands of marriages, right? It's one of those things.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, if you're fighting over like leg over the pillow, leg over the blanket, leg under, tearing the sheets off, opening the window, fighting over the air conditioning, all that goes away.
Unbelievable. And also, so the single track thing has fascinated me. My first book was about music and the brain, kind of the science behind how music can alter the brain and your performance. And that was the first time, though, your book, and when you talked about it, the single track, that I heard other people doing it, because I've been doing that for years. And one of the reasons it works so well is because I don't have to pick out music if I'm listening to the same thing to get into that state, right, where I'm writing or exercising, performing in some way. It's almost like a cue that gets you ready to perform more than music itself, right? Yeah,
absolutely. I mean, I think of it almost as an external mantra. So in, say, transcendental meditation, which came up a lot in these interviews, Arnold Schwarzenegger, for instance, did TM for a year and then stopped in the 70s, but says that the benefits have persisted for decades, which is kind of interesting to consider. And just as a side note, for whatever reason, it seems that a lot of men gravitate to transcendental meditation. A lot of women gravitate or end up with Vipassana meditation. I don't know why that is. And there's certainly exceptions, like Sam Harris uses some Vipassana, and there's plenty of women who do TM, but statistically or percentage-wise, really pretty clear split. The mantra in TM is something you repeat in your own head, right? It's a nonsense syllable or two, basically. And that allows you to override, in a sense, the monkey mind that would otherwise be ricocheting around your head with anxieties and doubts and to-do lists and petty grudges or whatever it might be. So that mantra is a focusing device, and I think that you externalize that when you take a track and you play it on repeat.
And then to your point about the Governator, when I remember when you guys were talking on your podcast, he mentioned that once he kind of learned mindfulness, all of a sudden he's meditating into his biceps when he's working out, and he applies it to other parts of your life. So I think it's less about like what your particular mantra is, and if it's TM, you can't tell anyone anyway. But it's more about teaching that mindfulness practice that you can later apply to being stuck in traffic, or when you're actually making your to-do list, you can take deep breaths and center yourself.
Yeah, I mean. And that is how I view meditation. I do 20 minutes in the morning typically, although sometimes I'll do shorter. I'll use something like a Headspace and do 10 minutes with a guided, which is the easiest. And I think it's a good place for a lot of people to start, certainly. The way I view meditation is a limbering up and a warming up of attention to your thoughts for the rest of the day. Right. So effectively, what's happening is your thoughts get carried away, they drift off, you're thinking of God knows what, and then you reel it back in to the mantra or to your breath or something else. Or to a guided meditation that's like flicking you in the forehead and saying, hey, stop thinking about porn or whatever it is. And then the reeling in is the rep, right? So you do that, and you're doing it in a controlled environment where you're at your house, let's just say. So what is that like? That's like going to the gym and warming up with 40% of your working weight. And you're like, okay, just making sure my joints are working. Okay, this is just risk mitigation. And the warm up of meditation later allows me to be less reactive when it matters. So you're basically practicing being aware and less reactive when you have complete control over the circumstances when it doesn't matter, so that you can later apply it when it does matter, is how I think of it.
And I'm so glad that was one of the main lessons coming out of that tome of a book, because it's so simple and it's something that a lot of people just kind of skip right over, like sleep, right? Where these things are critical pillars of performance, but a lot of people are like, oh, that's boring. I want the silver bullet, right?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, and there's so many misconceptions that I think are reversed by this book. So, for instance, as you know, the book's split into healthy, wealthy, and wise. That's how the profiles in my own chapters are gathered, because it's two things. It's a nod to Ben Franklin, and it's also effectively answering the question, what would you add to the 4-Hour Work Week if you were to write again? What would you add to the 4-Hour Body if you were to write again? Same with 4-Hour Chef. So it's those three sections. This book basically the sequel to all three of those. And there's so many misconceptions about successful people, like, oh yeah, they sleep 4 hours a night. No, they don't. The vast majority, there are some mutants like Jocko Willink and Amelia Boone who they're robots. They just need 3 or 4 hours of sleep a night. But the vast majority of these people are getting 8 to 10 hours of sleep. And they understand how much hinges on that as a restorative and recovery practice. Then you, for instance, hear all of these sayings that have been said so often that we assume they're true about making money, for instance. Well, you got to spend money to make money. You got to take risks to make it big. You got to get high returns, you have to take high risks. All nonsense. All three of those are nonsense. And if you look at, say, Richard Branson, there's a story about Richard Branson in the book, or top hedge fund managers, the first thing they do is cap the downside. They're minimizing risk. So when Branson started his airline, he has this reputation, or image, I should say, of being this kind of fly by the seat of his pants, wild adventurer, and he does all that stuff. But in business, he's super methodical. And for instance, when he started Virgin Airlines, it originated when a flight was delayed, and this was a commercial flight, and he wasn't going to make it to his destination in time, and he rented a charter plane. And he figured out it was something like $2,500. And then he walked around the airport with a sign that said, I think, Virgin Air seats $250 or whatever it was, until he had sold the seats to other people who were delayed, got to the other side. So he realized there was a demand for something like what he could create. And then when he was considering really biting the bullet, negotiated an agreement with Boeing so that he could return the plane if it didn't work out. Immediately looking at capping the downside and understanding the downside. And that is something you see at the highest levels of finance. This is something that billionaires talk about. You can find, what Tony Robbins, who's also in the book, would say, asymmetrical bets, asymmetrical rewards, where you're actually risking nothing in some cases and getting a lot back. Like Kyle Bass, who is famous for, among other things, shorting or positioning himself to make an unbelievable amount of money from the subprime crisis. One thing he did a while back was he bought nickels. He bought, I don't know what it was, millions of dollars worth of nickels. Now, why on earth would you do that? Well, he figured out that the meltdown value was higher than the face value of the nickels. So it made like an immediate $400,000 or whatever it was. It's just nuts. And that's look, currency value fluctuates, but he knew enough about his game that was effectively a risk-free investment. So because like what's the worst thing that happens? He bought it at 5 cents. He can use it as 5 cents. but the meltdown value is 6.5 cents or something. So it's just really looking at things differently. That is, I suppose, the biggest commonality across 100% of the people.
Can I ask you this though? Because one of the things in your book, it demonstrates the fact that you're looking around for the people who are the best in the world at what they do. And you've always kind of done that. All your books are kind of following that same pattern. But, it's hard to go straight to the top. And the world of self-improvement is littered with kind of pseudo-enlightened blowhards and phonies. So like these days, how do you know who to trust?
I look at objective results, honestly. It's for me, and I'll give you an example. All right, so yeah, the fluffy blowhards, oh my God, there's a lot of that there's a lot of that everywhere. That's why whenever I'm being introduced and someone says like motivational speaker, and I'm like, no, that's not what I am, because the association is so negative. But okay, give you an example. So when I was looking for a dog trainer for my own dog, this is just for me, and I recently had the person I chose on the podcast, Susan Garrett. Why did I choose Susan Garrett? Okay, because most of the so-called expert dog trainers out there are famous for being famous. Maybe they train dogs for celebrities. Well, what the hell do celebrities know about dog training? Zero. So why would that mean anything to me? And it doesn't mean anything to me. But how would you objectively evaluate a good dog trainer? Well, is there any competition? And the answer is yes. There are agility competitions and there are obedience competitions, but agility competitions are particularly difficult. And Susan Garrett, despite being 20 or 25 years older than all of her competitors, is the most successful agility dog trainer of the last few decades. And you can measure these things. You can look at false starts, just like sprinters out of the gate, the Olympics. And these numbers are recorded. So objectively, I'm looking at her sort of fight card and identifying how good she is relative to other people in these competitions. And that's it. So I know she's not a blowhard. Just based on the data objectively, that's it. Now, it's very important that, as they say, once you're lucky, twice you're good. I want to find people who have replicated their success. I'm not looking for one-hit wonders, because too much luck could be accounted for, or too much luck could be the causal factor. If that makes any sense, that could be dissected by some philosophers of thought. But the point being, some of the new guests, for instance, Jack Dorsey, right? This guy's helped build gigantic revolutionary companies
at the same time, right?
At the same time, at least twice. Evan Williams, same story. Mark Andreessen, same story. These people it's not once you're lucky, twice you're good. It's like 3, 5, 7, 10 times. You know something most people don't know. There is something you're doing. And the other thing that I will try to separate out very quickly is, and this is very important in sports, as you know, trying to separate out how much of their success is due to training versus attributes, right? So, and you can observe this in, say, competitive swimming. As you go, high school swimming, junior varsity, people look completely different. They're all sorts of body types, every shape and size. And then as you get higher and higher, the body types get more and more similar until they all look like freaking bats. Yeah. They're like 6'5" right. Bats, like Michael Phelps, with ankles that dislocate and giant flippers. What the hell is going on there? So there are two difficulties with going after someone like a Phelps, even though objectively he is incredible. Number one, he has attributes that would make even a mediocre training method very effective. Right now, he has super refined training method. Don't get me wrong, but for you, if you don't know how to swim, like I didn't know how to swim until my 30s. All right, and I discovered, total immersion swimming, and I wrote Chris Sacca, the billionaire, who I watched probably from when he was making like $100,000 a year, and then he introduced me to it. But that was I covered that in the 4-Hour Body, so I won't belabor it here. The point being, if I went straight to Phelps and asked him, hey, could you train me, and by whatever stroke of luck he agreed, I'm not going to understand the subtleties of what he's doing. And number two, he's been doing it since he was a fetus, probably. So he's not going to remember what it was like not to know. Okay. So I'm looking also for people who have learned a lot in a short period of time. People who have, again, ideally, objectively, let's just say they appeared on, I'm making this up. Somebody appears on the MMA scene. They started jiu-jitsu when they were 18, 20, which is late these days. And all of a sudden, they're a phenom. Okay, that's interesting to me, right? In that shorter period of time, there's some type of training advantage, environmental advantage, behavioral advantage. Something is there, and I'll go digging. And then if I find a place like a gym where I trained a long time ago, AKA in San Jose, California, where they've just produced champion after champion after champion, okay, if there's a mutant factory, something's going on. Either they're really good at finding mutants, which is a skill in and of itself, or they're helping to create those mutants. So those are some of the ways that I avoid the blowhards. Honestly, I find that if you just let the blowhards talk long enough, they tend to incriminate themselves. And then you're like, wait a second, that doesn't sound right at all. If someone is giving you advice about something they haven't done themselves, I would tread very carefully.
Yeah, that's great advice. Now, this kind of dovetails into that. You type a question into Google these days, and it's a complete crapshoot. It used to be pretty good, right? You get this like old blog from a professor who wrote it, and it's still in that like 1998 template with frames or whatever. But it had good information. Now it's just it's intercepted, it seems like. So here's an example of that, which actually I think kind of works with the dog thing. So I have a 5-year-old yellow lab, and listeners know that well. But I was thinking about the lifespan of dogs and how big dogs tend to live a much shorter life than smaller dogs. And I thought, well, does that apply to people as well? So I Googled, do short people live longer than tall people? As you do. And so 50% of the Google results said that short people undoubtedly and conclusively live longer than taller people. And then the other half of results said the exact opposite. So where does that leave us? How do you find your information?
Well, that's a tough one. But I do have, it's very domain specific. So I'll give you an example. I thought you were going to talk about dog lifespan and dog life extension. So that would be pretty, I'm not going to say easy to figure out. There's a lot of garbage out there, but I would go, again, thinking about data, evidence, something that's been evaluated, I would go to PubMed.
Yeah.
Probably to look at studies, and you could search lifespan, canine extension, and probably come up with a fair number of things that would be interesting, whether that's metformin or rapamycin or some type of intermittent fasting, who knows? All of those things would probably pop up. You could also look for data in, say, related mammalian models that might transfer to a canine. But what I have realized, and this is going to sound maybe super simplistic and kind of silly, just call an expert and ask them.
Yeah.
So it's academics, for instance, and I don't say that in a derogatory way, but people at universities are generally really happy to talk to you. They are, but if you go after the best-selling author with questionable credentials around canine lifespan, and you want to ask them, well, you're going to have to go through their publicist, or you're going to have to go through their agent, or you're going to have to battle to be one of the 100,000 people who follow them on Twitter to get their attention. Why bother? You don't even know if they're qualified to begin with. They just had a best-selling book. That doesn't mean anything necessarily, okay? I mean, we can talk for ages about all that stuff. That is a whole other can of worms. That's a whole separate kettle of fish. So I would just reach out to someone at a university. I would call up, like, I have a question about dogs. Okay, might call someone at UC Davis, well-known veterinary school. All right, let me try to get a hold of one of the top 5 specialists I think might understand this. And who knows? If it's a really important question, this is critical. Important question, pay somebody. Pay somebody $100 for 15 minutes of their time to get the answer. But I think that very often there are questions that I want to know the answer to out of curiosity, and then there are those I hope to take some action in response to, right? So, like, look, if it comes back that tall people live longer, I'm not a huge guy. So I have to deal with the hand that I've been dealt, right? So there are, I would say, a few different ways to go about it, but my first default response, if it's a important question with some type of verifiable answer, where studies have been conducted or there's some science, hopefully some science, to back it up. Would any institution or person ever fund a study to look at this is a question, right? So the height, I don't know. Like I probably not, but you never know. And you could find, although they wouldn't be running a controlled trial because that wouldn't get approved to begin with, but you could find epidemiological census data maybe that would morgue reports that would give you some very, very tenuous data to play around with. So that could be one way to do it. But whenever I'm in doubt these days, it's incredible how often I will read like 100 books on a subject and then realize, why didn't I just spend $100 for 15 minutes on Skype with this person who lives at basically camps out at a university right down the street, who has a PhD, MD, and knows exactly what the answer is? That would have taken, I don't know, 3 hours to set up and figure out, and I'd be done. So there is a lot of that, but it also comes down to, if you're looking on the internet, like looking at, particularly if it's a question about how to do something, has this person done it? Number one, has this person done it? Is this person where I want to be? Are they doing what I want to do? Have they successfully done what I want to do? And once you're lucky, twice they're good. So if you're trying to become a real estate investor and someone's like, hey, I did this thing with one house and I flipped it and I made 5x. Cool. That's awesome, man. That sounds incredible. How many houses have you flipped? Well, just one so far. Okay. And well, maybe not this, maybe not Dracula, but maybe Time Out. And let's think about this, because it is chance accounts for a lot of what happens in this world.
But at the same time, okay, so if you take your advice, if someone or your experience and someone came to you asking for advice, it's like, correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe for your first book, it's like you went to 30 publishers and they're all like, nope.
Yeah.
Yet, you've published multiple #1 New York Times and Wall Street Journal bestsellers over and over again. And that's a pattern. There's something that you're doing there. It's almost like the skills that you've been building are such that no one could keep you from the top. Like even those gatekeepers would eventually become irrelevant in some way, because you're busy, instead of just Googling something and getting all those nonsense answers, you're going out to the fringes and looking for the people who can actually answer your questions or build those skills. So I guess that the takeaway for listeners is, if you're just Googling something, then try going to PubMed. And if you don't know how to read studies, then invest in learning that skill, because that's a skill that you can definitely build and it will pay huge dividends down the road.
Yeah, absolutely. There's actually an appendix in the 4 Hour Body, which is an excerpt from a book called Bad Science that talks specifically about how to read these studies. And it doesn't have to be intimidating. I want to touch on one thing you said, though. So getting turned down by 27 publishers. Okay, so that was an error on their part. And of course, you'd expect me to say that, but I can explain what their error was. And so let's just say, I'll give an example of where I might pay attention to that guy who's only flipped one house if I want to learn real estate. Let's say that this same person has had success in another area that has been duplicated, or that he or she has replicated multiple times, right? So if this person is not a real estate investor, but they're a restaurateur, well, actually, almost by default, you're a real estate investor in that case. But let's say they are, who knows, they run kiosks in an airport, and they started with one, and they now have 30 in different airports, and they're massively profitable. And this person did it in a short period of time. Am I going to be interested to hear how that person thinks about real estate investing, especially after their first success? Oh yeah, I'll listen to that person. I will just listen to multiple people. So the mistake that the publishers made who turned me down, there were quite a few mistakes. There's no love lost between me and them, but I saved a lot of their letters. Oh man, they were rude. It's like, it's one thing to say no to people, but it's another to really brusquely and rudely just like punch someone in the gut. It's just not necessary.
I got some of that from publishers too. It's gross.
But so it's gross. So what they missed was I had an informed confidence, not an uninformed confidence. So a lot of people talk about like confidence, build confidence. I think confidence without evidence to support it is really dangerous, actually. And sometimes you have to fake it till you make it. But generally, I prefer to have an informed confidence. What I mean by that is I had been giving these guest lectures at the university I attended in high-tech entrepreneurship. And I was talking about a lot of the stuff that was in the 4-hour work week to these Princeton students, both undergrads and graduate students. So I had an age range. And I'd been doing that for, I would say, roughly 6 or 7 years, twice a year.
Okay.
And the notes that formed the basis for the 4-hour work week were the most popular pieces of those lectures that got a very strong response from the students. I had data to support what I wanted to put into a book form, and they just disregarded that completely. And that was foolish. That was something they should have at least asked a few questions about, but they very rarely did. And if someone has demonstrated, and this comes back to this idea that the people who are in the top 1% in a given field have a lot in common with someone who's in the top 1% in a totally different field. One could be investing, the other could be chess. One could be memory competitions, and the other could be hospice care, honestly.
Right.
They have a lot in common with each other. So if someone has demonstrated repeated excellence in one field, I wouldn't underestimate their ability to demonstrate excellence in a new field at all, because the habits, the routines, the belief systems, the philosophies, the ability to negotiate, persuade, all of these things, ask good questions, which is very, very learnable. All of that transfers, right? But those are some of the ways that I think about this type of thing. And then at the end of the day, it comes down to, have I tried it? Have I been able to replicate the results? And everything in Tools of Titans, believe it or not, falls in that category, because it might seem like a big book. I mean, 704 pages, right? But it's intended to be a choose your own adventure, dip in and out kind of thing. So I don't really expect anyone to love. I mean, I think a lot of people will like the book. I loved writing it, but I would be happy if people ended up just absolutely loving 100 pages and they only read 200. I'm totally happy with that. And the ability to take 10,000 plus pages, distill it down to say 400 and then do 300 something original. I mean, the intent was to write this book for myself. I wasn't even planning on publishing this one, right? It was going to be the notebook to end all notebooks for myself. Right. And it's been a really cool process, man. It's been a really, really illuminating process for me. And I should say also, I'll tell a story for folks. So I was writing this book. I was out on Long Island, and I'd flown in a researcher to stay with me for the entire time and help with putting it together. Not writing it, just helping me with gathering certain bits and pieces. And we bumped into each other at the refrigerator one morning because we had a very set routine. And he asked me, he said, "How can you be so calm?" And I thought about it because I'm very rarely accused of being calm. I'm a very hard-charging, sometimes pretty tightly wound guy, or at least historically I have been. He goes, how are you so calm? We were a few weeks away from book deadline, gigantic project. And my car had just died. My dog had just been really badly injured. We had family and friends visiting. There was a ton of stuff going on, and I was the plate spinner. I kind of had to be the MC for a lot of it that was unrelated to the book. And I realized that as I was rereading all of these short profiles and chapters, I had been absorbing a lot of the habits and routines without really trying to do it. So I was taking cold showers and then taking hot baths. I was doing these different temperature exposure experiments that a lot of these folks like Wim Hof and Rick Rubin did. I was meditating in the morning and listening to the 2010 Smile Meditation by Tara Brach because Maria Popova had done that. And I was responding to errors and mistakes with this good ethos of Jocko Willink, which is really very stoic. It's similar to Seneca and a lot of the stoic philosophy that I think is just the ideal operating system for high stress environments. And what was so weird about this is that I am a journaling pro and con list, note-taking, analytical machine. That's just how I'm hardwired. So usually I live and die by to-do lists and task descriptions and scope of projects and all that boring stuff that I find necessary to keep my life in order. And I was calm despite the fact that I hadn't done that with any of these things. It had just kind of seeped in. So that's also, I think, part of the magic of whether it's with Tools of Titans or somewhere else, but studying these examples of excellence. If you're able to get them into a digestible form, you can absorb a lot. And that's why when I read these days, a lot of the times it's biographies. I'm reading about Benjamin Franklin. I'm reading about Genghis Khan. I'm reading about Richard Feynman. In that case, it's an autobiography. But those are just, there are a couple of the odd occurrences that I expected might expire that have persisted. Just like Arnold did TM for 1 year, Transcendental Meditation, and then it persisted for decades. I've been surprised how lasting the impact has been. So the fasting, the ketogenic stuff, the gymnastic strength training, like working on shoulder extension. So we have some of you can see this video, but this type of movement, if you were to say lean against a guardrail and grab onto it behind you and then squat down so that you're bringing your arms straight back behind you, working on that type of weakness. When we did an assessment, my thoracic bridge, a couple of things like that were really terrible. I couldn't believe how bad they were. And working on those literally 5 to 10 minutes a day for 2 weeks, and all of these problems that had plagued me for years, just poof, gone. It's been rad. Or some have been a little more painful, like the rumble roller was one that came up multiple times. Amelia Boone 3 times.
Tire, I think you call it.
Oh my God. Yeah. So I remember, Amelia Boone, 3-time world champion at World's Toughest Mudder, does 100-mile races and so on. Also happens to be a full-time power attorney at Apple. I mean, just cyborg. She's amazing. One of the toughest humans I've ever met. I mean, just to give you guys an idea, like 2012 World's Toughest Mudder, it's a 24-hour race, 1,000+ competitors. 90% of whom are probably male. She came in second place overall. She beat everyone except for one guy who beat her by 8 minutes, which in a 24-hour race is not a lot. It's like a hair's breadth. So she introduced me to the rumble roller, which, like you said, is this sort of monster truck tire meets foam roller. And to be honest, foam rolling had never done much for me. Maybe I was doing it incorrectly, but I never really saw a direct benefit. The rumble roller, I saw immediate benefits, but my recommendation is to start light. Do it for a few minutes, because I saw, I had seen and I had heard of Amelia just like, oh yeah, she'll sit there and work on different parts of her body with the rumble roller for say 30 minutes. So I tried to do that and then woke up the next morning and felt like I'd been put in a sleeping bag and slammed against a tree by a giant for about 4 hours. I was a disaster. So yeah, start light. But I now travel with one of those, and I have multiple rumble rollers wherever I might be, like waiting at the hotels that I tend to go to, because they're that important as a survival mechanism.
Is it the big one or the half size that you keep?
I have both. So I have the big one at home, which is gigantic, and then the half size I will sometimes travel with, but those, if I'm putting them into, say, a trunk, so I practice something called travel caching, at least I call it that, where there are, for me, 2 or 3 cities that I tend to go to 90+% of the time when I travel, and I have my go-to hotels. So I just have a trunk waiting in each of these cities with a week's worth of climate-appropriate clothing, and then a few things like a rumble roller or there's the Nayoya acupressure mat, technically is what it's called. There's another one called bed of nails, which is more accurately a descriptor. And it's basically a rollout mat with cleats on it and all over it. And this was recommended to me by Andriy Bondarenko, the one-armed handstand prodigy of Cirque du Soleil. The guy's amazing, from the Ukraine. And his sports acrobatics coach used to have them lay on these things for up to like an hour a day for back pain. And it was the first device to save me when I tore my lat, which is not a good injury. And it's the one that got me back on the horse and actually training again. And so that is another device, this bed of nails, or the Nayoya acupressure mat, not as catchy, that I will either travel with or have in one of these trunks, along with some coconut oil, which woe unto you if your coconut oil melts and leaks all over your clothing. That's not going to be good. But now a bunch of stuff from Tools of Titans is sitting there. So you got the exogenous ketones, the boxes of sardines, which last forever. That's a whole different conversation, and all sorts of goodies.
So you basically MREs in a bunch of different cities if if things go sideways.
Exactly. Yeah, if things go sideways, I don't need a bug out bag because I know exactly where I'm going.
That's fantastic. Now, another big theme in your book that works with this is unplugging and deloading. And that's one that I can absolutely vouch for. And it might not sound like something that would be a secret of the pros because you think that they're gunning it all the time, always operating at 100% efficiency. We know well that is not the case. But anyway, listeners know pretty well that my wife and I have spent the past 2 years just traveling to all corners of the world before we settle down and have a family. And you might say, Tim, it's a mini retirement, but we're back in action now. But when I took a year off, from email and the internet. I was really unplugged. And a lot of that was out of necessity because we were in the woods and didn't have internet. And I also figured that was probably the last time I would ever get away with it. But I also took a year off from this podcast, which at the time was, ranked #1 in health in multiple countries. And everyone said I was absolutely crazy. But to your point, like when I came back on the map 12 months later, I launched a new album of original music with some of my friends in the Tim McGraw Band. I had a New York Times bestselling book and a starring role on a primetime ABC network TV show. And that's how you get your mojo back, right? It's not always easy, but you mentioned also in a recent podcast that you had the power of cultivating empty space, I think is how you described it. So could you comment on that a little bit? It's like you got to keep that bandwidth open to recover, get those ideas that allow you to leapfrog.
Yeah, for sure. So there are a couple of different aspects to this. The first is a lot of type A personalities have trouble unplugging and deloading, and that phrase deloading is taken from athletics, right? You'll have a deloading phase, and that is used for enhancing recovery and then ultimately becoming a better performer. Right, so you could view it as recovery if rest doesn't sit well with you, and a lot of it is just task switching. But what I would say is that many retirements for that reason and many other reasons are absolutely a necessity for me. Then to your point about coming back 12 months later, this is actually advice that B.J. Novak gave me. So cool. Actor, incredible writer, producer. He was on The Office and has had many best-selling books, is really a polymath. And the advice that he would have given to his younger self during The Office was enjoy it, because he was always trying to write something on the side because he felt like he never had enough time and he couldn't get it done. And the point he made was, if Will Smith doesn't do a film for 2 years, or people asking, where's Will Smith? What is he doing? Is he irrelevant? No, of course not. And he would say, if you're talented, you can get them to pay attention again if you need to, and not to feel that type of time scarcity that you always have to be on. And the quote you mentioned, the cultivation of empty space as a way of life, is actually from Josh Waitzkin. So Josh Waitzkin is super fascinating. He's a close friend of mine. He is considered a chess prodigy, although both he and I don't like the prodigy part of that, because he was the basis for the inspiration for Searching for Bobby Fischer, the book and the movie. He's a master chess player, but he's been able to take his learning framework and apply it to Tai Chi push hands. He was a world champion. He's the first black belt under Marcelo Garcia, who is, pretty much without any dispute, the best grappler to ever walk the planet, because grappling has evolved so quickly, and he's a 9-time world champion. And even people who have come in second place will tell you, they're like, oh yeah, no, like we're all here and Marcelo is here. There is no comparison. And he's now on to mastering yet a new art that I don't know if he's talked about publicly, so I won't get into it. But part of how he is able to distinguish himself is in a world of unending distraction, where an online economy's imperative is to distract you. The ability to single task, to do one thing for 2 to 5 hours, is a superpower. And it's just sitting there in front of you. You can choose to design your schedule and your life in a way where you have that available to you. And it is a superpower. So he will insist on creating a lot of slack in his life. He wants lots of empty space so that he can connect ideas. He can come up with original solutions, creative augments to different things that he's doing. And this is compatible with what a lot of the writers say that I've interviewed. Like, okay, you want to write for 3 hours a day. Well, try breaking that up into 15-minute segments where you're doing something else for the next 15 minutes and then back to writing for 15 minutes and then you're distracted. It doesn't work at all. And you need these large uninterrupted blocks of time. And that could be on the weekend if necessary. That could also be for a lot of people in Tools of Titans like Ramit Sethi, Noah Kagan. There are many who will, and this is an important point, put in their calendar. They're not going to find time. That doesn't happen. Work will swell to fill any void in your calendar for type A personalities. They will block out a time. For me on Wednesdays from 9 to 1 p.m., that is creation, which means writing, recording, anything that is purely proactive creation and production from me. It is non-reactive. And they will defend that, and I will defend that just as I would defend any type of conference call or business commitment. And there is incredible power in experimenting with taking these blocks of time for pure non-reactive production or brainstorming or creative exercise. That is a huge competitive advantage, and it's just sitting there. You just have to pick it up and implement it and actually put it in the calendar.
It takes discipline, but there are little tools, and if you start small like meditation, you build it out over time, and all of a sudden you feel like you're gaining energy from that time instead of, your life being sucked out of you in your inbox.
Yeah, exactly. And I would say also that a key component of all of this is when you start a new behavior or when you're attempting to adopt a new behavior, make it as easy as possible. If it's stressful, you're not doing it right. Make it easier. If it's stressful at all, make it easier, because the objective is to make it a habit. In other words, to log at least 5 sessions so that it becomes part of your routine, like tying your shoes or brushing your teeth. And if you want to game the system, you start off by making it very easy. So if you want to say, and this is something that BJ Fogg from Stanford, who's done a lot of good work on this in his Persuasion Lab, if you want to start flossing, everybody hates flossing, let's be honest. So if you want to start flossing, how might you start flossing? Well, how could you make it as easy as possible for the first 5 sessions? So first week, Monday to Friday, how can you make it as easy as possible? Well, what is the minimum that might even be considered flossing? How about flossing your front teeth? That's all you have to do. That is the threshold for success, so to speak. And how else can we make it easy? Well, why don't we use a water pick, let's say, or the disposable kind of floss picks that don't require you to tourniquet your fingers with dental floss, which is super uncomfortable. Make it as easy as possible. Now, once you have developed the habits, let's say you don't work out at all, you have no exercise regimen whatsoever, you get to January, New Year's resolutions. This is where a lot of people flame out. Okay, you know what? I'm going to do it. I'm going to do it this year. 1 hour a day, 5 days a week. That's where I'm starting. Okay, 99 out of 100 people are going to stop that within 3 weeks, because either it's going to just seem completely overwhelming, which it probably will be because they haven't figured out how to do that scheduling dance properly yet, or they're going to get injured. So you start with making it as easy as possible. So what does that mean? That might mean 10 minutes at the gym 3 times a week. That's it. You get in 10 minutes, you've won for the day. Checkbox, gold star. If you do any more, it's just bonus points, but you've already passed. And then only at the later stages, when that's already a habit, now, okay, I'm happy to push you until you puke into a bucket. But in the beginning, that's a mistake. When you're established, there's a difference between establishing a new habit and optimizing an existing habit. Those are totally different animals. The good news is you can rig it, you can stack the deck so that it's more likely that you will win. And you do that by whenever you feel stressed out by a new habit, asking yourself, how can I make this easier? What is the most ridiculously small thing I could do that would qualify for fill in the blank? Flossing, exercise, whatever.
Yeah. Then put it in your calendar.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. Then put it in your calendar. And ideally have some type of social accountability or incentive, meaning punishment or reward. One of the easiest for all this stuff is either an accountability partner who's just going to shame you if you don't do it. People respond, I hate to say this, but it's true. If you study literature, it's pretty definitive. People will work a lot harder for loss aversion or to avoid a negative incentive than they will to get an equivalent positive incentive. In other words, like punishments work really well. Okay, you want to lose weight. You keep saying you want to lose weight. And as Derek Sivers would say, one of our mutually favorite people, who's in the book, he would say, if more information were the answer, we'd all be billionaires with six-pack abs. More information is not the answer. Everybody has some idea of doing many different things they claim that they can't currently do. And one thing you could do is find your most merciless friend, and you want to lose weight? Okay, great. Haven't been able to do it. Don't know why. All right. January 1. Take some really unflattering pictures of yourself, or have someone take photos of you with your phone in your tidy whities or in your underwear. Like bad lighting, bloated after a bunch of eating during the holidays. Take those photos, and then if you don't lose, let's just assume that you're 20% body fat or more. Okay. You're probably walking around with at least 20 pounds of fat on you. I think that's safe to assume for most folks. Okay, you have 2 months to lose 20 pounds. And if you don't, these photos go directly on the internet. And I'm going to share them on Facebook and ridicule you to no end. I guarantee you that person is going to figure out how to lose 20 pounds. And that is the genius of incentives. Humans are incentive-driven machines. That is it. Period, full stop. So study how to create those incentives yourself. And there are a number of sites that do this pretty well. So for accountability, coach.me is one. For creating an anti-charity, which is kind of similar. The anti-charity, the nonprofit that you would rather nuke than give money to, you put money into escrow, and if you don't accomplish your goals, there are referees on this site, stickk.com, and that money will go to this charity that you hate so much, and then your name will be on the public record. So that is also, it sounds ludicrous, but man, is it effective.
It's so great. Well,
it's fantastic.
We're coming up on time, Tim, but there's a quote in your book that reads, "Any useful statement about the future should at first seem ridiculous." So what's something that sounds ridiculous now, but in your mind might kind of prepare us for an uncertain future?
Ooh. Okay, so we're looking for a prediction. Is that what we're looking for? Or are we looking for how to prepare for an uncertain future? Those are two different things.
Let's pick your favorite of those two.
I'll choose the second because I think it's more flexible. To prepare for an uncertain future, you have to get comfortable with discomfort, and you do that two different ways. One is by dissecting the worst case scenario, and that's using an exercise I call fear setting, and really putting your fears under a microscope. And as Tony Robbins would say, the achiever word for fear is stressed. So if you're saying, I'm just a little stressed, just substitute afraid or fearful and fear setting. So really looking at the worst case scenarios and dissecting it, analyzing it in that way. The second is through fear rehearsal. And this is really undervalued. Both of these things, by the way, are explored by the Stoics. So Seneca, Marcus Aurelius, etc. Fear rehearsal would be practicing what you fear. So Seneca, in I think it's letter 13 of Festivals and Fasting, might be his moral letters to Lucilius. And I have this excerpt, the entire chapter in Tools of Titans, which I was stoked about, just to sneak in some writing that's 2,000 years old into contemporary writing and have people not notice. It's so easy to read. But he said, set aside a few days each month. I'm paraphrasing here. Set aside a few days each month where you will subsist on the scantest of fare, the roughest of dress, asking yourself all the while, is this the condition that I so feared? Okay. What does that mean? Well, I fast for at least 3 days, consecutive days every month. I will also go through periods of time, at least once a quarter, where I will eat extremely cheap food, meaning rice and beans all day, oatmeal all day, and wear the same clothing. I will wear, say, a white T-shirt and a pair of jeans for the entire week. And I might even sleep, say, I've done this before. There are other people like Kevin Kelly who's done this before, sleep on the floor in a sleeping bag. Okay, go camping for an extended period of time. Go up to the mountains, whatever it might be, and effectively subsist on less than $5 a day. Okay, and if you come out of that experience, and perhaps you are even happier than you were before you went into it. This is really weird, but it happens very consistently. You come out of it and you're actually even happier because you don't have all this stuff and garbage and nonsense to keep your mind occupied. Okay, so you've done a week at $5 or less a day, $35 a week. How much do you have to make in a given year then for that existence to at least get you by for a period of time? Very, very little is the answer. And when you start to defang your fears in that way by practicing your worst case scenarios, your whole world opens up and you realize that no matter how cruel fortune might be, no matter what might come your way, no matter how uncertain the future, that you are prepared for most of it. You can weather the storm. And I think meditation helps. I think reading Stoicism helps. I think practicing habits that you know can hold you over during difficult times, habits and routines that become your lifelines and your life vests, I think are extremely critical. So when everything is thrown into doubt, when everything seems uncertain, there are certain things that you can control. And having those as allies and friends you can depend on, I think is certainly a huge asset and something that prepares you for that. And, for me, that was the whole point. I have tough periods, man, and I've written about them in the book too, but it's like I've had some really dark, tough moments, and I want to have those allies. I want to have that scaffolding and those frameworks and routines and so on. And that's the whole reason that I put this little notebook together from me, myself, and I, and just ended up turning into another book. So here we are.
Well, it's a fantastic one, Tim, and I really appreciate it. So where can folks find you? Tell us a little bit more about the book and what you're working on next.
Sure. What I'm working on next, no idea. I try to put out something that is the best I can possibly do, like Tools of Titans, and then I wait to see what doors open.
Cultivating some empty space, perhaps.
Cultivating some empty space. And Tools of Titans, toolsoftitans.com. You can see a bunch of sample chapters as well as the foreword, which was written by Arnold Schwarzenegger, which still kind of blows my mind. Very surreal. As a Long Island kid raised on Commando and Predator, that's wild. And it can be found anywhere. So Amazon, Barnes & Noble, Indigo, IndieBound, you name it. It's going to be everywhere. So I really encourage people to check it out. And it's a really good gift book. And I had one friend of mine, Kamal Ravikant, Naval's brother, who was helping me proofread this book. He was reading it and he said, I've given the 4-hour work week to some people who wanted to start a business. I've given the 4-hour body to some friends who wanted to lose weight. Like this book, I'm going to give to everyone. Like I'm getting copies from my mom. I'm giving it really covers Healthy, Wealthy, and Wise covers it all. So I hope people consider it for those they care about. And, if not, hey, just remember, no matter your struggles, no matter your ambitions, goals, you're not alone. Someone else has figured it out. So go find those people and study them at the very least.
I love it. Well, I can personally say that I've really enjoyed your book, Tim, and I'm not the whole way through, but like you said, you can kind of pick and choose the things that really appeal to you, and it's not going to be the same for everyone. So if you guys are interested in being better at whatever you're doing, check out Tools of Titans, check out Tim Ferriss's work. This is my favorite book that you've done so far. I think it has the most to offer people. It's just across the board. So thank you so much for the work that you do, and you're welcome on the show anytime.
Thank you, sir. Well, I appreciate it, and sounds like we need to go hiking
That
together.
sounds good, man. Let's plan on it.
All right. Thanks so much, man. Happy holidays.
Before you go, don't forget to grab your listener discount on our 30-day fat loss plan. In this plan, we share 30 days of mouth-watering wild diet meal plans that are designed to help you drop fat with real food. The meal plans are paleo-friendly, easy to make, and literally the meals that my wife Allison and I eat just about every day and night to stay lean, fit, and happy. In the program, you'll get the most effective method of meal and nutrient timing to best stimulate fat loss and muscle recovery, the truth about how much protein you really need for your body type, 30 days of specific healthy fat-burning meal plans as a done-for-you nutrition strategy, and tons more. If you check it out today, you'll even get a listener discount. All you have to do is type in fatburningman.com/30 days. That's the number 30, DAYS. Once again, that's fatburningman.com/30 days. I'll see you there. Thank you so much for joining us on this episode of Fat Burning Man. If you liked it, don't forget to hit the subscribe button on iTunes, Stitcher, YouTube, the podcast app, or wherever else you might be listening to or watching this show. Got a second? Please leave me a quick review on iTunes. I always love hearing from you, and if you think someone else might like and benefit from this free show, please take a second to share it with a friend or with a family member. You can get in touch with me on Twitter at FatBurnMan and Facebook by typing in Abel James or Fat Burning Man. Drop me a line anytime. Did you know that I've recorded over 150 episodes of Fat Burning Man, winning 4 awards in independent media and hitting #1 in more than 8 countries? And here's some more good news. You can download and listen to every single episode for free. All you have to do is type in fatburningman.com. I'll give you a second to type it in, fatburningman.com. And you'll get all the show notes in video and audio versions for all the past episodes of Fat Burning Man. Better yet, enter your best email at fatburningman.com, sign up for my newsletter, and I'll even send you a quick start guide to start burning fat right now and a few of our ridiculously tasty recipes as a special thanks for signing up. Once again, just go to fatburningman.com right now, enter your best email to get your free fat burning download straight to your inbox, and make sure that you never miss a show again. This is Abel James signing off. Thanks so much for listening, and have a great week.
Stout.
That's so cool, and it's such like an interesting journey as well, going from something that basically it seems like, and correct me if I'm hearing this wrong, but you were eating